I still remember the sound. It was only 1 second, a sharp, violent ring beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Crescent Palace Hotel, but that sound seemed to silence an entire room. I was standing there in my white waitress uniform, holding a silver serving tray with both hands, when the fabric across my shoulder suddenly tore. Several buttons bounced across the marble floor, spinning beneath the expensive shoes of people who had come to the gala, wearing watches worth more than most families' homes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I looked down at the torn uniform, then slowly looked back at the police officer standing in front of me. He didn't look sorry, he looked satisfied. His name was Officer Daniel Reeves, and from the first moment he had entered the ballroom, he had treated me like I was invisible. He had walked past millionaires, politicians, executives, and celebrities with the confidence of a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. But when his eyes landed on me, something changed. To him, I wasn't a person. I was just a waitress, and that assumption would become the biggest mistake of his career. "Maybe now you'll learn to follow instructions," he said coldly. I could hear hundreds of people breathing around me. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Some guests stared at me with shock. Others immediately lifted their phones. A few looked away because watching someone being humiliated was easier than finding the courage to stop it. I pulled the torn fabric together with trembling hands. "My name is Maya Carter. I'm 28 years old, and that night I had chosen to work the charity gala anonymously. I wasn't there because I needed the money. I wasn't pretending to be poor. I was there because I wanted to understand something my wealth had made difficult, to see how people behave when they believe nobody important is watching. My father had taught me that lesson when I was a child. He used to tell me, "Maya, watch how someone treats the person who cannot help them. That tells you more about their character than how they treat a billionaire." I never forgot those words. That was why I volunteered at shelters, served meals at community events, and sometimes worked alongside hotel staff without telling anyone who my family was. I wanted to know people without my last name entering the room before I did that evening. I had been carrying drinks toward a VIP table when a guest accidentally bumped into me. A few drops of sparkling water landed near a handbag belonging to a wealthy woman. I apologized immediately. I offered to have the bag cleaned. The situation should have ended there. Instead, the woman demanded that the police remove me from the gala. Officer Reeves arrived within minutes. He never asked for my side of the story. He never checked the security cameras. He never spoke to the witnesses standing around us. He looked at my uniform, looked at the wealthy woman complaining about me, and made his decision. "People like you always think rules don't apply to you," he said. I remember staring at his badge. Not because I hated police officers. I didn't. I had relatives who had served their communities in law enforcement. I knew that thousands of American officers put themselves in danger every day to protect strangers. That's why what happened next hurt even more. A badge is supposed to represent responsibility. It is supposed to mean that someone has been trusted with power. But power without accountability can become something dangerous. "Officer," I said quietly, "I'm willing to cooperate, but please don't treat me like I've already been found guilty." He laughed. That laugh is something I'll never forget. "Just do what you're told." I lowered my eyes for a moment. Not because I believed he was right, because I was trying to control my emotions. I knew one angry reaction could become the only thing people remembered about that moment. Then he stepped closer. Several hotel employees began moving toward us, but they stopped when the officer raised his hand. "This is police business." And then his fingers grabbed the front of my uniform. I heard someone gasp. I heard a woman whisper, "Oh my God." I heard a phone camera start recording, and then came that sound again. My uniform tore open. The ballroom erupted in shocked silence. I instinctively covered myself and stepped backward, tears burning behind my eyes. Officer Reeves looked at me, as if he had just won. He had no idea that the woman standing in front of him was not powerless. He had no idea that someone had already seen everything. And he certainly had no idea that less than a minute later, the ballroom doors would open, and the one person I had spent years trying to keep out of moments like this would finally walk into the room. For a few seconds, nobody in that ballroom seemed to remember how to breathe. I could feel the cold air against my skin. Where the uniform had been torn, my hands were still gripping the fabric, trying to protect my dignity, while hundreds of eyes remained fixed on me. But I refused to give them the reaction they were expecting. I refused to scream. I refused to insult the officer. And most importantly, I refused to let one man's abusive authority convince me that every person wearing a badge was my enemy. I looked around the room and saw something that disturbed me, almost as much as what had happened. People were watching people who had the money to hire lawyers, people who had connections to politicians, people who had security teams protecting them. Yet most of them were silent because they were afraid of becoming involved. That was when I realized something I would remember for the rest of my life. Sometimes injustice doesn't survive because everyone agrees with it. Sometimes it survives because decent people become afraid to stand against it. Officer Reeves turned toward the crowd. Everyone needs to step back. He ordered. His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed the room belonged to him. Then he looked at me. "You're coming with me." I shook my head. "I haven't done anything wrong." His expression hardened. "You're resisting, no," I answered quietly. "I'm asking you to check the cameras." For the first time, several people around us began whispering. A hotel employee finally stepped forward. "Officer, there are security cameras covering this entire area." Reeves immediately turned toward him. "Did I ask you?" The employee stopped. I watched him lower his eyes. I understood why he was afraid. His job depended on this hotel. His paycheck supported his family. One complaint from the wrong person could potentially cost him everything. I didn't blame him, but I wished someone would find the courage to speak. Then a young black woman from the catering staff stepped forward. Her hands were shaking. I saw what happened. She said. The officer stared at her. "You need to stay out of this." She swallowed hard, but I saw it. Those 3 words changed something in the room. I looked at her and gave her the smallest nod. She had no idea how much courage it took for me to see her stand there. She wasn't protecting a wealthy woman. She wasn't protecting a famous executive. She was simply protecting the truth. And sometimes the truth is the most dangerous thing a person can carry when someone powerful wants it buried. Officer Reeves looked increasingly irritated. "You people always make things more difficult than they need to be." The words hung in the air. I saw several guests exchange uncomfortable glances. I wanted to respond, believe me. I did, but my father had once told me that when someone wants to make you angry, the strongest response is sometimes refusing to let them control your emotions. So I stayed calm. Then something unexpected happened. A hotel security guard quietly approached one of the ballroom doors. He looked outside, then he looked back at me. His face changed. I didn't understand why. He whispered something into the earpiece attached to his collar. Another security guard immediately joined him. Then another. The atmosphere began changing. People near the entrance started moving aside. I heard someone say, "Who is that?" Another guest whispered, "Is that him?" I turned toward the doors. At first, all I could see was a group of security personnel walking quickly into the ballroom. Then a man stepped through the doorway, tall, calm, dressed in a dark navy suit. No flashy jewelry, no dramatic entrance. No army of bodyguards surrounding him, but the reaction of the people in the room told me everything. Conversations stopped, phones lowered. Hotel executives straightened their jackets. One of the senior managers suddenly whispered a name. "Daniel Carter." My heart stopped. My father, the man whose company employed thousands of Americans, the man whose foundation had built schools, funded scholarships, and donated millions to hospitals. The man who had spent his entire life teaching me that wealth meant nothing if you used it to make other people feel small. He had come to the gala unexpectedly, and he had walked into the worst moment of my life. Our eyes met across the ballroom. His expression changed instantly. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the expensive decorations. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked only at me. Then his eyes moved to my torn uniform. I watched the anger rise in his face. But my father did something that surprised everyone. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply removed his jacket and walked toward me. Every step became heavier. Officer Reeves suddenly looked uncertain. The man who had seemed completely fearless moments earlier was now watching my father approach with an expression I had never seen on his face before: fear. My father stopped in front of me. He gently placed his jacket around my shoulders. Then he looked into my eyes. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "No, Dad." The word escaped before I could stop it. The entire ballroom went silent. Officer Reeves' face went pale. The waitress he thought he could intimidate had just called one of America's most powerful businessmen Dad. My father slowly turned toward him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, officer. He said calmly, "I would like to understand exactly what happened to my daughter." And suddenly the man, who had spent the last several minutes controlling everyone in that room, realized something terrifying. For the first time that evening, someone with power was asking him to explain his actions. For a few seconds after my father asked that question, nobody moved. I could hear the faint hum of the hotel air conditioning and the distant clicking of camera shutters. A few hundred people were standing around us, but the ballroom felt strangely empty. Officer Reeves looked at my father, then he looked at me, then he looked toward the security cameras mounted above the entrance. His confidence was disappearing. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten him. He simply stood beside me with the same calm expression he had carried throughout his life. "Officer," he repeated. I asked what happened. Reeves cleared his throat. "She was causing a disturbance." My father glanced at me. "Is that true?" I shook my head no. Then something happened that I will never forget. The young black catering employee who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. "No, sir," she said, "that's not what happened." Her voice was still shaking, but this time she didn't step backward. She apologized. The officer never checked the cameras. He assumed she was responsible because she was wearing a waitress uniform. The ballroom became completely silent. My father nodded. "Thank you for telling the truth." Those 4 words seemed to give her strength. Then another witness stepped forward. Then another suddenly. People who had been silent moments earlier began describing what they had seen. The wealthy woman admitted that the spill had been accidental. A hotel manager confirmed that the security cameras had captured the entire incident. And when the footage was played on a nearby security monitor, there was nowhere left for Officer Reeves to hide. The video showed everything. It showed me apologizing. It showed the accusation. It showed the officer refusing to listen, and it showed the moment he grabbed my uniform and tore it. Nobody in that room could pretend they hadn't seen the truth anymore. My father watched the footage without saying a word. When it ended, he turned toward Officer Reeves. "I don't want revenge," he said. The officer looked confused. My father continued, "My daughter doesn't need revenge. She needs accountability." Those words stayed with me, because that was the difference between power and abuse. Power can destroy someone, but real power knows when to stop. My father asked the hotel to preserve all security footage and requested that the appropriate authorities conduct a formal investigation. He didn't demand special treatment because of our wealth. He didn't ask anyone to bend the law. He asked for the law to be applied fairly. That distinction mattered, because I have spent years believing that police officers can be some of the strongest protectors. In our communities, I know there are officers who work overnight shifts while their families sleep. I know there are officers who run toward danger when everyone else runs away. I know there are black officers who wear their uniforms every day, knowing that their actions represent something bigger than themselves. A badge should never be an excuse to humiliate someone. It should be a promise to protect them. That night, Officer Reeves was placed under investigation for his conduct, and the evidence was turned over. Through the proper legal process, there was no mob, no revenge, no billionaire calling politicians, just evidence witnesses, accountability, and the law. And somehow that felt more powerful than revenge ever could. Before leaving the ballroom, I looked at the young catering employee who had spoken up for me. I hugged her. "You were brave tonight." She shook her head. "I was scared." I smiled. "Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you tell the truth even when you are old." That moment reminded me why I had chosen to work anonymously. In that hotel, I had wanted to learn how people treated someone they believed had no power. Instead, I learned something even more important. I learned that ordinary people can change the direction of an entire situation when they decide not to remain silent. And I learned that being a black woman in America does not mean I have to become hardened by every unfair experience. I can remain strong without becoming cruel. I can demand justice without becoming consumed by revenge. I can respect the badge while still demanding accountability from the person wearing it. Before we left, my father looked at me and asked whether I wanted to go home. I looked around the ballroom one final time. "I do," I said, "but not before I say something." I walked toward the microphone. Hundreds of faces turned toward me. I looked at the officers in the room, then the hotel employees, then the guests. And finally I said, "Never judge someone's worth by the uniform they wear. A waitress can have a master's degree. A janitor can be someone's father. A police officer can be someone's hero. And a black woman standing quietly in a crowded room can be carrying more strength than anyone realizes." Nobody applauded immediately. For a moment, there was only silence. Then one person stood, then another. Soon the entire ballroom was on its feet. Not because I was the daughter of a billionaire, but because for one night, people had witnessed something money couldn't buy: dignity, courage, and accountability. As I walked out beside my father, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't seeing a powerful man lose his confidence. It was knowing that the truth had been heard. If this story meant something to you, don't just watch it and scroll away. Tell me honestly in the comments, if you had been standing in that ballroom, would you have stepped forward when everyone else was silent? And what kind of story should I bring you next? Another powerful justice story involving a black woman, a police officer, or a completely unexpected act of kindness? Your answer could shape the next story we create together. And if you believe that justice should protect everyone, regardless of their job, their skin color, their income, or their social status, subscribe to the Justice Verdict. Share this story with someone who believes that kindness is not weakness and that accountability is not revenge, because here we don't celebrate humiliation. We don't celebrate abuse of power. We believe that every person deserves dignity, every badge carries responsibility, and every injustice deserves to be answered with truth. This is the Justice Verdict, where every story has a lesson, every choice has a consequence, and sometimes the quietest person in the room has the strongest voice.